On the morning of September 30th, 2025, Europe awoke to a headline that would send shockwaves through every corner of the continent. Hungary to exit European Union, seek BRICS membership. The news flashed across television screens, blared from radios, and dominated social media feeds before most people had even finished their first cup of coffee. It was a moment that instantly became historic, a headline that would be discussed in classrooms and boardrooms for years to come. The impact was immediate and profound. Financial centers from Frankfurt to Paris saw markets tumble as investors scrambled to make sense of the news. Politicians in the European Parliament exchanged stunned glances, their faces etched with disbelief and concern. Hungary, a nation once celebrated as a post-Soviet success story, a symbol of democratic transition, had chosen to turn its back on the European project, sending ripples of uncertainty through the heart of Europe. In Budapest, the mood was electric and deeply divided. On one side, crowds gathered in the streets, waving Hungarian flags and cheering Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's bold defiance of Brussels. For them, this was a moment of national pride, a reclaiming of sovereignty. But just blocks away, others stood in silence, clutching EU flags, their faces somber as they mourned what they saw as the loss of a European future and the unraveling of decades of progress. Across the continent, the dream of a united Europe seemed to fracture in real time. The image of the EU flag being lowered in Budapest was broadcast live, a powerful symbol of a union under strain. For millions, it raised urgent questions about the stability and future of the European project. Was this the beginning of a domino effect or a unique rupture that could be contained? In Brussels, the initial stunned silence quickly gave way to a flurry of activity. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors as European leaders made frantic phone calls, seeking to coordinate a response and reassure their citizens. The corridors of power buzzed with anxiety as officials grappled with the reality that the EU's unity was now in question. Hungary's decision was seen not just as a political rupture, but as a direct challenge to the very identity and values of the European Union. The symbolism was impossible to ignore: a handshake breaking apart, the EU flag with torn edges, and a parliament filled with tension and uncertainty. Newsrooms and think tanks across Europe scrambled to assess the fallout. Analysts debated the potential economic, political, and social consequences of what was quickly dubbed Huxit. Would other nations follow Hungary's lead? What would this mean for the balance of power in Europe and beyond? On the streets and in the studios, ordinary citizens and political commentators alike debated fiercely. Was this a one-off event or the first sign of a deeper unraveling? The uncertainty hung heavy in the air as clouds gathered over Europe's capitals. By pivoting toward BRICS, Hungary signaled a dramatic and unprecedented shift, turning its gaze from west to east and aligning itself with emerging powers like China, Russia, and India. This move not only redefined Hungary's place in the world, but also hinted at a possible reshaping of the global order itself. The continent, and indeed the world, watched as history unfolded in real time. Viktor Orbán made the historic announcement before a packed parliament, his voice echoing through the Grand Chamber. The air was thick with anticipation as lawmakers, journalists, and citizens alike waited for his words. With a measured tone, Orbán declared Hungary's intention to leave the European Union, a move that would send shockwaves across the continent. He framed Hungary's exit as a bold reclaiming of national destiny, insisting that the country would chart its own course, free from what he described as the overreach of Brussels. Orbán spoke of restoring Hungary's sovereignty, promising a future where Hungarians alone would decide their fate. Outside, supporters erupted in celebration. The streets of Budapest filled with jubilant crowds waving Hungarian flags, singing patriotic songs and lighting flares. For many, Orbán was hailed as a liberator, a leader who had finally broken the chains of foreign influence and restored pride to the nation. For these supporters, the announcement was more than a political decision. It was a victory for sovereignty, cultural identity, and the preservation of Hungarian traditions. They saw it as a turning point, a moment when Hungary reclaimed its voice on the world stage. Yet across Budapest, a very different scene unfolded. Pro-EU demonstrators gathered in city squares, their faces marked by worry and disbelief. Many held EU flags and banners, expressing their deep concern for the future. For them, the decision felt like a betrayal, a step away from democracy and the values they cherished. To these Hungarians, EU membership was about more than economics or open borders. It was a safeguard for rights, freedoms, and a connection to the broader European family. They feared that leaving the EU would isolate Hungary, threaten hard-won liberties, and undermine the rule of law. In Brussels, the response was immediate and severe. EU officials convened emergency meetings, their faces grim as they discussed the implications of Hungary's decision. The sense of shock was palpable, with leaders scrambling to contain the fallout and reassure other member states. EU leaders quickly condemned Hungary's move, calling it a reckless act and the culmination of years of Orbán's defiance. They warned of serious consequences, both for Hungary and for the unity of the European project. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, expressed deep regret over Hungary's decision. She emphasized that while the EU respected national sovereignty, its core values, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law were non-negotiable. Behind closed doors, anger simmered among European leaders. Tensions ran high as they debated how to respond, knowing that the stage was now set for a bitter and complex separation process. The sense of betrayal was matched only by the uncertainty of what would come next. Many analysts predicted that the process would be even more acrimonious than Brexit. The stakes were higher, the divisions deeper, and the path forward far less clear. The specter of drawn-out negotiations and economic turmoil loomed large. As Hungary leapt into the unknown, its citizens found themselves deeply divided. Families, friends, and communities debated the merits and dangers of the decision, unsure of what the future would hold. The sense of uncertainty was pervasive, touching every corner of society. Across the continent, Europe braced for a new era of uncertainty. The announcement marked not just a turning point for Hungary, but for the entire European project, a moment that would test the resilience, unity, and identity of Europe itself. The economic fallout was immediate and devastating, sending shockwaves through every corner of Hungarian society. Overnight, the familiar rhythms of daily life were upended as uncertainty gripped the nation. The Hungarian forint plummeted to historic lows, losing value by the minute. The Budapest Stock Exchange was thrown into chaos, with trading halted as panic spread among investors. Many scrambled to salvage what they could, but the damage was swift and severe. International investors, sensing instability, pulled out en masse, further accelerating the crisis. Across the country, panic gripped Hungary's financial system. Long lines formed at ATMs and bank branches as anxious citizens rushed to withdraw their savings, fearing the worst. Some banks imposed withdrawal limits, but that only fueled the sense of alarm and desperation. Businesses, especially those reliant on trade with the European Union, faced immediate chaos. Orders were cancelled, supply chains broke down, and uncertainty reigned. Credit agencies quickly threatened to downgrade Hungary's rating, warning of a looming debt crisis. Decades of painstaking economic integration with Europe unraveled in a matter of hours. Border checkpoints, once symbols of open trade, became bottlenecks as new barriers went up and trade ground to a halt. The shock did not stop at Hungary's borders. Financial markets across Central Europe trembled, with investors fearing a domino effect. Headlines warned of contagion, and neighboring countries braced for impact. In Brussels and beyond, policymakers gathered for emergency meetings, deeply concerned that Hungary's dramatic exit could inspire other nations to follow suit, threatening the stability of the entire region. The Hungarian government scrambled to contain the crisis. The central bank hiked interest rates to defend the currency, while officials promised swift action and new trade deals with BRICS nations. Yet these measures did little to calm the storm. For ordinary Hungarians, government reassurances rang hollow. Prices soared in shops and markets, wages lost value, and families struggled to make ends meet. The sense of uncertainty was everywhere, from the dinner table to the workplace. The path forward looked perilous and uncertain. The country stood at a crossroads, with no clear end in sight to the turmoil. Hungary's economic future, once tied to the promise of European integration, was suddenly in question. The nation faced a long and difficult road ahead, with its people left to wonder what tomorrow would bring. Hungary's exit was the result of years of ideological conflict. Orbán's vision of illiberal democracy clashed with the EU's liberal values. Budapest saw Brussels as overreaching, using rule of law demands as political weapons. Orbán framed the EU as a new empire, threatening Hungary's identity and sovereignty. This narrative of national defiance resonated deeply with many Hungarians. The split was cast as an inevitable divorce between irreconcilable visions for the future. To grasp Hungary's decision, you have to look back at its turbulent 20th century history. Decades under Soviet control made Europe a symbol of freedom and hope. Joining the EU in 2004 was a hard-won triumph, bringing prosperity and open borders. Yet the memory of lost sovereignty lingered. Many Hungarians, wary of outside control, questioned the cost of EU membership. Economic crises and migration debates fueled doubts. The same history that made EU membership so desirable also planted seeds of skepticism. Hungary's identity remained torn between East and West. Orbán's return in 2010 marked a turning point. With a supermajority, Fidesz rewrote the constitution, enshrining conservative values and consolidating power. Checks and balances eroded. Media and judiciary independence weakened. Brussels responded with legal actions but proved ineffective. Orbán cast EU criticism as a tax on sovereignty, fueling his domestic support. The more Brussels pushed, the more Orbán defied. The relationship devolved into open hostility. The break became all but inevitable. The migration crisis of 2015 crystallized the rift. Orbán's hardline stance, building border fences and rejecting EU quotas, became a rallying cry for sovereignty. He framed migration as a threat to Hungary's identity, resonating with voters at home and abroad. The EU's push for solidarity clashed with Hungary's insistence on national control. The conflict spilled into other areas: LGBTQ+ rights, media freedom, and judicial independence. Orbán saw EU demands as intrusions. Brussels saw democratic backsliding. Each side accused the other of betraying European values. The standoff became a proxy war over the soul of Europe. On law, power, and identity, compromise proved impossible. The chasm was unbridgeable. As ties with the West frayed, Hungary turned east. Orbán's Eastern opening policy deepened links with China and Russia, seeking investment without political strings. Chinese projects like the Budapest-Belgrade Railway became symbols of this pivot. Hungary joined BRICS, betting on new markets and a multipolar world. Orbán cast BRICS as allies in the fight against Western dominance. Hungary's exit from the EU was both economic and ideological, a wager on the rise of the East. Hungary now faces an uncertain future. The promise of sovereignty and BRICS investment is offset by economic risk and potential isolation. Critics warn Hungary may have traded Brussels' oversight for Beijing's influence. The EU, meanwhile, confronts its own failures and the fragility of its unity. Hungary's departure redraws Europe's political map, fueling debate over the EU's future. Some see tragedy, others triumph. Hungary's journey from post-Soviet hope to EU rebel is a cautionary tale. As the nation embarks on its solitary path, Europe watches anxiously. Will Hungary thrive or falter outside the EU? One thing is certain: the continent has changed forever.